September 19, 1944, 11:23 a.m. Walter Kowalski is jammed inside an M4 Sherman near Arort, France, and 3 Panzer IV are bearing down from about 800 yards. His palms are slick. His heartbeat is loud enough to drown out orders. 2 days earlier, a Panzer shell tore through their turret and killed their loader. Walter isn't a soldier by trade. He's a mechanic sent forward as a replacement. And until this morning, he'd only ever handled a training round 4 times. Chaos surrounds him. The gunner beside him is shouting about traverse speed. The tank commander has coordinates flying from his lips. The driver is backing into a hedgerow trying to buy distance. Walter's job is painfully simple and impossibly vital. Get a 38-pound, high-explosive 75mm shell into the breech and fast. Fort Knox drilled a specific rhythm into every loader. Nose forward, brass base lined up, slam it home, step clear. 4 seconds if you're slick, 5 if you're shaking. But the Sherman's turret is a burlap sack of inches, and Walter is left-handed. When he turns to face the breech the way he's seen others do, his left elbow collides with the gunner. The gunner shoves him. The shell slips. The Panzers are closer now. 600 yards. Training doesn't cover what you do when the textbook fails. Walter improvises. He pivots away, back toward the breech, feeling blindly. With one hand, he traces the chamber. With the other, he holds the shell's base. He guides the nose backward on muscle memory and force. The breech catches, slams shut. The gunner fires without a word. Scorch and smoke bite at Walter's neck. The recoil throws heat across his face. He doesn't pause. He reaches for the next round and repeats the blind, brutal motion. Back turned, left hand finding, right hand ramming. 3 seconds! The breech slammed. The gun roared. Walter's ears rang. Cordite burned his throat. 3rd shell, backwards again, 2.5 seconds. 4th shell, 2 seconds flat. Through the chaos, the commander's voice cut clear. 4 hits, 4 kills, 6 minutes of combat. Across a field, 400 yards away, the German Panzers burned. Silence fell inside the Sherman. Walter stayed frozen, back still turned to the breech, hands coated in black powder. The gunner stared, wide-eyed. The commander climbed down from his hatch, staring at Walter like he'd sprouted a second head. No one loaded a 75mm cannon backward. It broke every rule, every manual since 1942. But it worked. In that moment, Walter understood something the Fort Knox instructors never had. His improvisation would change how Sherman crews across the Third Army loaded their guns. The M4 Sherman wasn't built to face German tanks head-on. It was conceived in 1941 as a reliable, mass-producible infantry support vehicle, designed to punch through defensive lines, be easy to repair, and flood the battlefield in numbers. Between 1942 and 1945, the U.S. Army churned out 49,000 Shermans. They were solid, dependable tanks, but against a Panzer, they were undergunned. The Sherman's 75mm cannon could pierce 3 inches of armor at 500 yards, enough to stop a Panzer III. Not enough for a Panzer IV from the front. And forget Panthers or Tigers. They laughed at the Sherman's rounds. German engineers knew this. By late 1943, every new Panzer rolled out with frontal armor that Shermans simply couldn't punch through in combat. The Sherman's edge was supposed to be speed, mobility, and numbers. Doctrine said 5 Shermans could flank a single Panzer and destroy it. On paper, it worked. In practice, it meant 4 out of 5 Shermans were destroyed before they even got into position. Crews called it the death ratio. 4 Shermans lost for every German tank knocked out. At Villers-Bocage, a lone Tiger tore through 25 Allied tanks in 15 minutes. At Goodwood, British units lost 200 Shermans in a single day just trying to push south. Every crew knew the odds. They'd seen burned-out Shermans along the roads, pulled wounded men from turrets, watched armor cook off ammo inside a burning tank. A hit to the turret meant instant death for the loader, sitting inches from 20 ready rounds. When those shells detonated, nothing remained to bury. American crews improvised. Sandbags over vision slits, spare track links welded to the turret, camouflage markings to mimic command tanks. Anything to survive. Every trick, every scrap of ingenuity was a battle against numbers, armor, and fate itself. Walter's backward loading was just the latest spark of survival. It still didn't fix the core problem. A Sherman's 75mm simply couldn't reliably bite through the frontal armor of late-war German tanks. In a one-on-one showdown, whoever shot first usually won. So everything came down to speed. How fast you could load, aim, and fire decided whether you lived to see the next minute. On paper, a competent Sherman loader took 4 to 5 seconds per round. Pull a 38-bomb T-turn, a 38-pound shell from the ready rack, turn to the breech, line up the brass, ram it home, then step clear so the gunner could pull the trigger. German Panzer IV crews could match that tempo. Panthers were a bit slower, their shells were heavier, but their longer-range gun often made speed less relevant. They could kill a Sherman from far beyond return fire. At U.S. tank schools, the motion was drilled until it was muscle memory. Face the breech, both hands on the shell, shove it straight forward. The sequence was chosen because it was predictable and safe in practice. On static ranges at Fort Knox, where tanks were parked and no one was shooting back. But combat didn't care about predictability. And Fort Knox hadn't thought about a simple human fact. Left-handed loaders existed. Walter Kowalski was one of roughly 3,000 lefties serving in Third Army turrets. There was no official count. Nobody bothered. At training, the rule was simple. Learn to load right-handed, end of story. On a calm day with the tank still, that worked. In the chaos of battle, it could be deadly. Inside an M4's turret space is measured in inches, not feet. The loader stood to the right of the gun, the gunner to the left, the commander above. When the 75 fired, the recoil shoved the gun back nearly a foot. When the turret turned, every body and tool shifted. A right-handed loader's motions fit the geometry. His dominant arm lined up naturally with the breech, his left supported the shell, and the movement rarely clipped a crewmate. A left-handed loader faced the mirror image. Cramped angles, an awkward swing, and a tendency to bump into the gunner. That small difference could slow a load by a second or two. And on a battlefield where first fire meant survival, a second could be fatal. The standard loading method was a problem for left-handed men like Walter. To follow it, he had to lead with his weaker right hand, while his stronger left could only support from behind. Every pivot toward the breech sent his elbow swinging, bumping the gunner, the traverse wheel, or the radio mount. In practice, this added precious seconds. Left-handed loaders averaged 5 to 6 seconds per round instead of 4. On a training range, instructors shrugged and called it acceptable. In combat, those 2 extra seconds could, and often did, mean death. At Aracourt, in mid-September 1944, the 4th Armored Division lost 18 Shermans in just 2 days. Most tanks never fired a third round. After-action reports are grim. Loaders killed wrestling with the breech. Shells dropped in panic. Delays of 8 seconds costing lives. One left-handed loader fumbled a shell. A Panzer round struck before they could fire again. The loader died instantly. The gunner lost both legs. It wasn't just lefties. Even right-handed loaders struggled when the tank rolled over rough ground. Shermans had no gun stabilization. Every jolt shifted the breech. Gripping a 38-pound shell and ramming it home while the turret shook and under fire demanded flawless timing. Most loaders adapted by bracing one hand on the breech and guiding the shell with the other. It worked, but now a single hand held 38 pounds. Mistakes were inevitable. Drop a shell, and recovery could take 10-15 seconds. That was enough for a Panzer to fire and end the fight. Tank commanders saw it all. They watched skilled men die because the loading rhythm failed. Some tried to help, shouting coordinates faster, repositioning tanks to give the loader more time. But there was no official fix. Nothing in the manuals accounted for the chaos, the shake, the weight, or the left-handed loader. Walter's improvisation would change that. The manual was blunt. Face the breach. Shove the shell forward. No shortcuts, no improvisation. Changing the drill wasn't just frowned upon, it was against regulation. Yet the answer to the problem had quietly been sitting inside the turret all along, waiting for someone desperate enough to break the rules. Walter Kowalski stumbled into that breakage by luck and pain. 2 days before the firefight that would make him infamous, his tank took a hit near Rach. A Panzer shell glanced off the glacis instead of punching through, but the shock threw Walter hard enough to dislocate his right shoulder. The battalion medic popped it back into place and told him he was finished. No more loading, no more duty. A loader with a damaged right arm was useless. The standard technique demanded both arms working together. There were no clean options. The 4th Armored Division was under strength by a dozen tanks. Losses had been brutal, and 36 loaders had been killed that week alone. Replacements did not exist. Sergeant Raymond Miller, the tank commander, looked the situation in the eye and made a grim call. Walter would stay with the crew. They would find a way. The next morning, September 18th, the fog was low and the fields east of Araort hid more than mist. German positions opened up, and 3 Panzer IVs materialized at about 900 yards. Miller barked orders. The gunner swung onto the first target. Walter reached for the ready rack with his left hand. His right hung useless, numb and aching. He tried to follow the textbook. He turned, faced the breach, attempted to lift and guide the 38-pound round with both hands. Pain flashed through the injured shoulder. The shell tilted. It threatened to slip. The gunner shouted. The distance closed, 800 yards. Walter felt the pressure like a physical force. Training offered no help for a man with one good arm and a target bearing down. Panic and necessity pushed him to improvise. He pivoted the other way, back to the breach, closing his eyes to the wrongness of it. Feeling rather than seeing, he slid his left hand behind him until his fingertips found the hot, familiar rim of the breach. With a single brutal motion, he guided the shell's nose backward and drove the base home with his left shoulder and arm. The mechanism caught and slammed shut. When the gun fired, the blast hit him full in the back. Heat and acrid cordite washed over his skin. His uniform smelled of scorch and something closer to flesh. He didn't pause to register shock. The round was in. The gun had fired. The whole sequence took 3.5 seconds. Without hesitation, Walter reached for the next shell. He kept at it. Same motion. Back to the breach. Hand feeling for the rim, arm driving the round home. 3 seconds. The gun answered. Enemy shells began to whistle past the turret. Metal chewed the air. Dust exploded in the field. Walter didn't stop. 3rd round, 4th, 5th. His left arm burning. Tendons screaming, muscles knotting with every push. The fight ran 4 minutes. They sent 9 rounds downrange and punched holes in 2 Panzers. The 3rd limped away into the trees. When the guns finally fell silent, Walter's back and shirt were streaked with powder and soot. His left arm trembled from fatigue. His right arm still hung useless. No one spoke for a long minute. Sergeant Miller climbed down and looked at him as if seeing him for the first time. The gunner, pale and shaking, finally answered the question that hung in the air. How fast? He'd been counting. 3 seconds, he said. Sometimes less. Faster than their old loader. Faster than anyone Miller could name in the platoon. Faster than most men in the battalion. Miller didn't lecture. He told Walter to do it again if he had to. It was dangerous, and it broke every rule. But it worked. Why did it work? 3 things the training books hadn't bothered to notice. Better leverage, more usable room, and a movement that matched the human body. Facing the breach, a loader had to reach forward with both arms to shove that 38-pound shell. Extended arms are weak arms. You push with the ends of your muscles instead of the big engines in your shoulders and back. It's like trying to shove a heavy box with your wrists instead of leaning into it with your whole torso. Turning his back flipped the physics. Walter's arm stayed bent. He could drive the round with his shoulder, chest, and weight behind it. The travel distance dropped. A shorter, sharper shove instead of a long, exhausting heave. 12 inches of motion instead of 24. More power, less wasted effort, and a faster cycle time. Space mattered too. A Sherman's turret is claustrophobic. When a loader faces forward, he occupies a broad, boxy stance. Elbows flared, shoulders squared. And that width constantly collided with the gunner, the traverse wheel, or the radio. Turning around makes the loader's profile narrow, elbows tuck. There's less contact, fewer jams, and fewer accidental shoves that drop shells or slow the process. Those small changes added up. What used to take 4 seconds could be done in 3, sometimes quicker. And on a battlefield where the first shot often decided everything. A saved second could mean the difference between burning steel and going home. Every bump in that cramped turret cost time. And sometimes it cost the shell. When Walter turned his back to the breach, his silhouette narrowed. Instead of standing broad-shouldered and jutting into the crew's space, he pulled his elbows in and presented a slim line parallel to the gun. Where he once occupied nearly 2 feet of sideways room, he now took up a little over 10 inches. The gunner could move his controls without an elbow in the way. The commander could duck down without bonking Walter's head. Small things, but in a tight machine, they freed the crew to work without tripping over one another. The biggest payoff, though, was that the motion finally matched the body. The Army taught loaders to lead with the right hand. That's what most drills assumed. So crews learned to swing forward and shove the shell straight ahead. In a parked tank on a calm range, that made sense. In a rolling turret under fire, it was awkward. You had to twist left while reaching right, a contortion that demanded conscious coordination. Under stress, coordination phrase. Hands shook, breaths came uneven, and well-practiced motions unraveled. Left-handed men suffered doubly because the rule forced them to lead with their weak hand. Everything fought their instincts. Walter's blind backward shove removed the fight. He reached behind with his strongest hand, found the breech by feel, and committed to a short, powerful drive. It was instinctual. During combat, when the mind narrows and the body reverts to habit, the move became automatic. His left hand located the rim, guided the nose, his shoulder and back supplied the power. No awkward torso twist, no exaggerated reach. The trick worked for lefties and righties alike. A right-handed loader could simply reach behind with his right and get the same leverage and compact profile. There was one enormous problem. It broke every rule in the book. Technical Manual 9-731A wasn't vague. It demanded loaders face the breach, keep visual contact with the shell while loading, use both hands in a coordinated forward ram, and step clear of the recoil path after the round was seated. Turning your back? Not allowed. Closing your eyes and feeling for the breach? Forbidden. Leading with a single hand? A violation. The regulations were written for safety. A loader who couldn't see the chamber risked cocking around into a crooked position. A missed shell could jam the breech, freeze the gun, or worse, set off an accidental detonation when the mechanism slammed. Commanders understood those hazards. A jammed breech in combat meant a dead minute in which your tank was a target. A lodged round might ignite when hit. Manuals exist because some mistakes cost more than time. They cost lives. Yet manuals are written for best practices in ideal conditions, not for a man with a mangled shoulder and a field full of Panzers. Walter's method ignored the textbook hazards, but it solved a pressing battlefield reality. Faster, more consistent loading under fire. more consistent loading under fire. That contradiction put Walter and his sergeant in a hard place. To spread the trick officially would be to admit that the manual was obsolete in a brutal corner of warfare. And to do it without paperwork was to risk severe discipline. Teach it openly, and an inspecting officer might see the back-turned loader and see only a rule breaker. Let it die unrecorded, and other crews would keep losing men to the same seconds that had nearly killed Walter's crew. The choice between doctrine and survival sat heavy in the hatch, and it would force leaders to ask an ugly question. Which mattered more, the book or the men who had to follow it? A stuck breech in battle wasn't a minor annoyance. It could be a death sentence. The manual even pointed to horror stories from North Africa, where sloppy loading had jammed a breech and turned a tank into an oven. One of those incidents killed an entire crew. Sergeant Miller knew the rules and he knew the risks. He also knew that Walter's backward shove had just kept his crew alive. After September 18th, Miller faced a grim choice. File a report, lose his best loader to disciplinary action, and obey doctrine, or say nothing and keep winning. He chose silence. The next day's engagement proved him right. On September 19th, Walter's crew knocked out 4 Panzers in 6 minutes using the new method. Word travels fast in a war zone. When units are trading 2 Shermans for every German tank, any edge gets noticed. By September 20th, a few other loaders were trying the backward load. By the 21st, there were 8. No paperwork, no officer briefings, just men quietly turning their backs to the breach in combat and surviving more fights. The numbers followed the practice. Crews using the backward method were cycling 9 to 10 rounds per fight instead of 6 or 7. They landed lethal shots sooner before enemy gunners could return fire. Survival rates climbed. The 4th Armored Division's kill ratio, once skewed horribly against them, began to move toward parity. But this change spread like a rumor for good reason. It broke regulations. Loaders taught each other in hushed exchanges behind maintenance sheds, demonstrating the motion while worrying an inspector might walk up at any moment. Then Lieutenant Colonel Creighton Abrams walked into one of those demonstrations. Abrams commanded the 37th Tank Battalion, a 30-year-old known for bold, aggressive tactics who'd already earned a reputation for getting results. On September 23rd, he watched a training drill and saw a loader complete the backward motion in under 3 seconds. He stopped the exercise, pulled the crew out, and demanded answers. Miller stepped up and told the story. Walter, the shoulder, the hasty invention, and the numbers. Abrams listened, then asked one direct question. Does it outperform the manual? Miller didn't hedge. Yes, sir, he said. On average, 2 seconds faster per round. More reliable under fire, fewer dropped shells, smoother crew movement in the cramped turret. Abrams paused for 30 seconds, letting the weight of the moment settle. Every tanker nearby held their breath, half expecting Miller and Walter to be hauled off for breaking regulations. Then Abrams made a decision that would change American tank combat forever. He ordered every loader in his battalion to learn Walter's backward method, immediately. The manual didn't matter. Kill ratios and crew survival mattered. If turning your back to a 75mm cannon kept his men alive, that was the new rule. Within 48 hours, the 37th Tank Battalion was training every replacement loader on Walter's technique. Abrams brought Walter in himself to demonstrate, showing the step-by-step motion while experienced loaders practiced until they could match his 3-second pace. There were no formal memos, no changes to the field manuals, just hands-on, practical instruction that worked. By October 1st, 90% of the 37th's loaders were using the backward method in combat. Average engagement times dropped from 12 minutes to 8, kill ratios improved to better than even, and crews came home alive more often. Other battalion commanders in the 4th Armored Division noticed and asked Abrams what he was doing differently. Some adopted the technique immediately. Others hesitated, citing regulations. The manual existed for a reason, after all. Changing procedures without authorization could get you disciplined, but General George Patton commanded the Third Army, and Patton cared about exactly two things: speed and results. When his staff showed him the after-action reports from the 4th Armored, he asked only one question: why weren't all the loaders doing this? On October 7, 1944, Patton visited division headquarters. He watched Walter demonstrate the backward loading method. 3 other loaders repeated the motion under his eye, timed on his stopwatch. 3 seconds. 2.8. 2.9. Patton turned to his chief of staff and gave a single, decisive order. Every tank battalion in the Third Army would adopt this method immediately. Any battalion commander who refused to adopt the method would be relieved. Any officer who court-martialed a loader for using it would answer to Patton personally. The Third Army had 11 armored divisions, roughly 4,000 Sherman tanks. Within 2 weeks, Walter's backward loading method became standard across the entire Army. Training officers taught it to replacement crews. Veteran loaders passed it to newcomers. It spread officially. No more whispered secrets behind maintenance sheds. The impact was clear. Between October and December 1944, Third Army's tank kill ratio jumped from 3.2.1 against American forces to 1.4.1. Shermans were taking out German tanks faster than the enemy could replace them. Crew survival rates rose by 18%. The backward method wasn't the only reason for the improvement, but it was a major factor. First Army and Ninth Army noticed, and by January 1945, loaders across the European theater were turning their backs to the breach. By March, the method reached the Pacific, and crews in Okinawa were using the same technique Walter had stumbled upon in France. The Army never officially updated Technical Manual 9-731A. It still said loaders should face the breach, but every experienced tank commander knew better. Manuals were theory. The backward method was survival. By the war's end in May 1945, tens of thousands of Sherman loaders had used Walter's technique. Exactly how many lives it saved is unknown, but the numbers suggest it was significant. Walter Kowalski himself never received a medal. No commendation, no official recognition. The Army doesn't award honors for breaking rules, even when those violations save lives. He did receive a promotion. On October 15, 1944, Sergeant Miller recommended him for corporal, and it went through. Walter spent the rest of the war in the 37th Tank Battalion, surviving 14 more engagements between October and May. His story shows what happens when ingenuity meets necessity, and how one soldier's desperate solution reshaped an army's approach to combat. Walter's tank took 3 direct hits, and he walked away each time. Between September 1944 and May 1945, his crew destroyed 23 German tanks, every round loaded by Walter, using the backward method. By the war's end, he could load a 75mm shell blindfolded in 2.3 seconds. The motion was etched into his muscles. His hands knew the rhythm without thought. After the war, Walter returned to Detroit and resumed life as a mechanic at the Ford River Rouge plant. He married in 1947, had 3 children, and worked 41 years before retiring in 1986. He rarely spoke about the war. Most veterans didn't. But the method he had invented continued to save lives long after he went home. During the Korean War, American tank crews facing North Korean T-34s were trained in the backward method at Fort Knox before deployment. 1st Marine Division reports highlighted how critical loader speed was in close-range tank duels around the Busan perimeter. The backward loading technique gave Shermans a clear edge. American loaders averaged 2.8 seconds per round, compared with 4 seconds for North Korean crews. In Vietnam, the last combat Sherman served with the South Vietnamese Army. Even though the tanks were outdated, the loading principles remained relevant. Crews operating M48 Patton tanks adapted Walter's method for the 90mm guns. Back to the breach. feel for the chamber, shove the shell home. The physics didn't change just because the gun was bigger. Even after automatic loaders appeared in the 1970s, variations of Walter's technique were still taught. M1 Abrams tanks have semi-automatic systems, but the human loader still handles rounds manually before they enter the mechanism. At Fort Benning, instructors who had served in Vietnam passed down modified versions of the backward method well into the late 1980s. In 1993, a military historian studying 4th Armored Division tactics discovered mentions of the backward loading method in after-action reports. He tracked down Walter through veteran registries and asked him about it. Walter smiled and said it wasn't anything special, just a solution he came up with when his shoulder was injured. But what began as a desperate workaround had left a legacy lasting decades, shaping the way tank crews fought and survived across multiple wars. The historian published a paper, calling it one of the most significant tactical innovations to come directly from frontline troops in World War II. He estimated that Walter's backward loading method may have saved 300 to 500 American tank crew lives in the European theater alone between October 1944 and May 1945. That number didn't include Korea, Vietnam, or the decades of training that followed. Walter passed away in 2004 at age 82 and was buried at Resurrection Cemetery in Clinton Township, Michigan. His obituary noted his service in World War II, but didn't mention the fact that he had fundamentally changed how American tanks fought. His 3 children were at the funeral, along with 7 other men, all veterans, all former tank loaders. None had met Walter before that day, but each had learned the technique from men who had served alongside him in France. They came to honor what he had given them: survival. The backward loading method remained standard for tank loaders until fully automatic loading systems were developed. Even then, crews operating older M48 and M60 tanks continued using variations of the method through Vietnam and into the 1970s. Early M1 Abrams crews were still taught modified versions of Walter's technique during training until automation fully took over. Today, Walter's service record can be seen at the National Archives in College Park, Maryland, a quiet testament to a soldier whose simple, desperate innovation saved lives and shaped tank warfare for generations. Walter Kowalski's official documents say nothing about his revolutionary loading technique. They list his rank, unit, and service dates. That's it. But if you dig into the 4th Armored Division after-action reports from September to October 1944, you'll see brief mentions of faster loading times and improved crew efficiency. No explanation, just results. At the Patton Museum in Fort Knox, Kentucky, a restored M4 Sherman sits on display. The interior is preserved exactly as it was in 1944. The loader's spot on the right side of the turret is tight, cramped. Stand where Walter stood, and it's obvious why he turned his back. There simply wasn't room to do it any other way. The placard lists the Sherman's specs: armor thickness, gun caliber, engine horsepower. It notes that American crews developed clever tactics to overcome the Sherman's weaknesses. But it doesn't mention Walter Kowalski, doesn't mention the backward loading method, doesn't acknowledge that some of the most crucial innovations come from terrified 20-year-olds trying not to die. Wars are often won not by generals, strategies, or superior equipment, but by ordinary people making split-second choices under fire. By mechanics finding better ways to load shells. By soldiers willing to bend or break the rules when the rules fail. Walter never claimed to be a hero. He was just a left-handed kid from Detroit who couldn't use his right arm and had to find another way. A way that saved his life and hundreds of others. If you found this story as compelling as we did, take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from World War II. Subscribe to stay connected to these untold histories. Each story matters. Each story deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community stretches from Texas to Tasmania, from veterans to history enthusiasts. You're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.